Good morning. I am Arthur Gonzalez, Chair of the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. I would like to welcome everyone joining us today for the Oversight Board's 50th public meeting, which is being held virtually by video conferencing. To begin the meeting, I would like to start with a roll call to formally determine if we have a quorum. Dr. Andrew Biggs.
I'm present.
Myself as president, Mr. John Nixon.
Present.
Dr. Betty Rosa.
Presente.
I don't know if the governor has joined us yet, but as soon as she does, we'll recognize her. It looks like we have a quorum and the meeting is now called to order. As usual, I'd like to ask our general counsel, Mr. Jaime El Corre, if he is willing to act as secretary for this meeting.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you. I would like to thank all government officials joining us online today, as well as everyone watching the live stream of this meeting via the Oversight Board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. The audio of this meeting is available in English, and there is also a simultaneous Spanish translation. Additionally, the meeting is being translated into sign language. If you log into the English language website, the audio will be in English, and if you log into the Spanish website, you will hear the simultaneous translation. As usual, we will be handling questions and comments from our online participants through a forum that is available on our website. You will find this form on the live stream page and complete it by putting your name and adding any questions or comments you might have. We will provide answers on our website. Answers to questions from previous meetings have been posted. We have the following agenda items for today. Approval of minutes of public meetings and executive sessions of the Oversight Board, administrative matters, update from the Executive Director, remarks from Governor Jennifer Gonzalez, presentation on the Commonwealth's financial condition and budget development, other matters, and adjournment. We'll turn to approval of the minutes. The first order of the business is to approve the minutes of our last public meeting, which was held on December 10th, 2025. The minutes are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix A. We also need to approve the minutes from a series of executive sessions held since that public meeting. Those executive sessions were held on December 19th, 2025, January 16th, 2026, January 26th, 2026, and February 23rd, 2026. The minutes of the executive sessions are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix B. Are there any questions about the minutes? There being no questions, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to approve the minutes of the last public board meeting held on December 10th, 2025, which are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix A, and the minutes of the executive sessions held on December 19th, January 16th, January 23rd, and February 23rd of 2026, except for the December was 2025, which are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix B and the form presented to the meeting.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to ask for a voice vote. First, all in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. Any opposed? All of the motion has passed. We deal with now administrative matters. Next, we have a couple of routine administrative matters. Would someone make the first motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the following motion Between the adjournment to this meeting and the opening of the Oversight Board's next public meeting, the Oversight Board may consider an executive session any and all matters that it is authorized to consider under PROMESA, including first, any certification determinations authorized by PROMESA, including certification determinations under Section 206 of PROMESA. Second, any submissions or authorizations authorized by PROMESA. And third, any filings authorized under Title III of PROMESA, in each case that are set forth as part of the vote to convene such executive session. The Oversight Board may also act by unanimous written consent between meetings in accordance with its bylaws, with such consent to include consent by electronic transmission.
Thank you, Andrew. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, John. Would all in favor please say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? All members present having voted in favor, the motion passes. We have one more motion which relates to unanimous written consent, UWCs. Would someone make that motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to confirm and approve any unanimous written consents adopted by the Oversight Board since the adjournment of our last public meeting, which are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix C.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Andrew. Will all in favor please say yes?
Yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All of the board members present have been voted in favor. The motion passes as well. Next, we will move to the substance of today's public meeting. I will open the floor to our Executive Director, Robert Mojica, for an overview of the Oversight Board's work since our last public meeting. Robert, the floor is yours.
I think Robert is
I
on
don't
mute.
think your audio has been on, Robert.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez, board members, Governor. During our last public board meeting held in December, we discussed the process of developing the Commonwealth budget for next fiscal year, 2027, which begins on July 1st, 2026, only 4 months from now. We discussed the co-leadership model, working with the government to develop a consensual budget that institutionalizes the lessons learned through disciplined processes while transferring accountability and responsibilities for fiscal and budget matters from the Oversight Board to the government. Together with the governor's budget team, we have since made more progress, both in defining the parameters of the budget and in how we integrate important reform elements in this upcoming budget, turning experience into clear, transparent processes and accountability. Together, we took a careful look at government tax revenue, and for several years, tax revenue rose more than projected. This experience was not unusual. In most U.S. states, tax revenue far exceeded expectations because of the federal government stimulus that followed the COVID-19 pandemic. But now, based on the most recent data, we anticipate that tax collections in Puerto Rico to decline from the previous year. General fund revenues, looking at data through November of 2025, are marginally higher than forecast, but nonetheless are projected to be lower than the prior 2 years and among the lowest since 2022. It is too early to say whether this is a trend, but it could signal that economic growth is slowing as federal stimulus funds run their course. The economists who presented their outlook at the 2026 Puerto Rico Economic Forecast Symposium earlier this month did not predict a downturn, but all warned about the effect of slowing federal stimulus and disaster recovery funds on Puerto Rico's economic growth trajectory. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported last Friday that the U.S. economy overall grew more slowly in the fourth quarter of calendar year 2025 than a year earlier. This data significantly underperformed the projections of economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal. However, The government and the Oversight Board are prepared. Years of fiscal discipline have put Puerto Rico in a much better position to withstand a slowdown in tax revenues. And we will continue to build a more responsible and resilient budget that can withstand economic challenges. And that is the main reason that the budget targets for fiscal year 2027 remain consistent with 2026 levels. They reflect declining revenues and continued economic uncertainty. Our Budget Management Director, Elisa Guardiola, will today provide more details on the Commonwealth's financial condition and on budget development. The government is now transitioning from crisis budgeting to institutional and strategic budgeting. It is within this context that we frame the ongoing discussion about government priorities, including tax reform. The Oversight Board and the Fiscal Plan for Puerto Rico have long noted that tax reform is necessary. A complicated tax system with a high statutory tax rate, but significant and unequal tax exemptions, is not competitive nor oriented for growth. Moreover, the current tax structure stimulates a sizable informal economy that is depriving the government of crucial tax revenue and shifting the tax burden to fund government services, including education and healthcare, to fewer taxpayers. All of these structural deficiencies must be addressed to position Puerto Rico for growth. We must think about the tax system more holistically. We can lower statutory tax rates if we broaden the base for tax collection. Corporate income taxes must be part of that rethinking of the tax rate and tax revenue structure, along with sales taxes and other consumption taxes. The government recognized the need for tax reform earlier this year. We must continue to work on a more comprehensive reform, and the Oversight Board is ready to support the government in that effort. For now, we agree with the governor that the people of Puerto Rico deserve tax relief. A one-time tax rebate or refund can be done responsibly while we work on a more holistic tax reform. For the past 2 weeks, we have met with the government to find a one-time personal income tax relief framework that is fiscally responsible. While immediate relief is welcome, it must not come at the expense of long-term budget stability and resiliency. There is a path to tax refunds, but long-term stability means we must first fund critical reserves that prepare Puerto Rico for the road ahead. In 2016, the government's cash reserves were so depleted that they could only cover 2 weeks of expenses, which was irresponsible. Together, we rebuilt the government's operating cash balance, which was depleted completely when PROMESA was enacted, and as a result, we now have adequate operating reserves to manage cash flow effectively. The Oversight Board established an emergency reserve to provide fiscal liquidity when hurricanes or other natural disasters strike, to supplement federal disaster funds and help ensure a rapid response to natural disasters. There was no such funding when Hurricane Maria hit. This disaster emergency fund is sized based on guidance provided by the International Monetary Fund, which recommends 2% of GNP be set aside. The emergency fund has been deployed many times over the past years to quickly respond to natural disasters and emergencies that are declared by the governor. We must also adequately fund our statutory budget stabilization fund. Nearly every state maintains a formal rainy day fund or budget stabilization fund to protect against economic downturns and emergencies, because fiscal resilience is now considered a core responsibility of government. These funds specifically reserve for economic recessions or major fiscal events to cover unanticipated government revenue losses. Most states base their funding requirements on a share of prior tax revenue, general fund expenditures, or surplus funds. Puerto Rico also had a budget stabilization fund, but it was not funded. It must be reinstated now, considering the warning signs we are seeing ahead. With the stability of the Oversight Board has created, it is the right time to prepare for potential fiscal uncertainty in the future. We will work with the government to establish the appropriate size in the budget for fiscal year 2027 of the reserve. Another priority for the coming fiscal year is the creation of a capital fund for infrastructure. The budget will need to formally segregate funds for capital projects, which are investments to build, maintain, and improve Puerto Rico's infrastructure. The Oversight Board has already administratively segregated funding for many previously announced capital projects in the budget. However, there is no formal segregation distinguishing these allocated funds from general fund balances. These funds must be formally separated and reserved until the projects are completed or the funds are reallocated. The public should be able to see how much money is set aside to begin and maintain infrastructure funds such as roads. In addition, the credit rating agencies look to whether Puerto Rico has the fiscal capacity and discipline to support long-term capital and infrastructure investment when assessing credit risk. This discipline and transparency is also a critical way to improve infrastructure planning, which Puerto Rico's businesses depend on to ensure long-term investments that support job creation. In most states, spending for capital projects is kept separate from the general fund, which is the government's budget for its day-to-day expenses and operations. The most recent investment plan of the Planning Board shows that infrastructure investment in Puerto Rico is heavily reliant on federal funds at nearly 90%. This dependency on federal dollars highlights the need for local capital planning process supported by local funding commitments to ensure project execution. So it is within the context of evaluating the Commonwealth statutory reserves, government priorities, and Puerto Rico's budget risks that we are analyzing the government's proposal for a tax refund. Tax refunds must not come at the expense of resiliency. However, by setting aside the needed reserves and capital funds, we can also provide for long-term fiscal stability and resiliency while also providing taxpayer relief. The two can happen together. We are working through the information and the data that the government provided, and we will come to a conclusion very soon. For many years after PROMESA was enacted, the focus was on managing fiscal crises. We then entered into a phase of stability after completing the Commonwealth debt restructuring. Budgets grew again and revenues recovered. We are now able to allocate funds for new investments. Now we transition into a new phase, strategic and institutional budgeting. This shift focuses on planning for the future rather than managing stability. Resources must be aligned with Puerto Rico's long-term goals and strategic priorities rather than being constrained by short-term annual spending priorities. Puerto Rico must continue to focus on the risks and how to accommodate those fiscal risks in its strategic planning. Rising payouts for the Earned Income Tax Credit, the potential decline in Medicaid funding from the federal government, PREPA and UPR pension shortfalls, and their potential effect on the Commonwealth budget, the unresolved liability of potentially significant Commonwealth payments for losses at cooperative financial institutions, the cost of canceling contracts, and funding infrastructure priorities. All of these must be considerations in strategic budgeting. At the same time, we are working with the government on a budget that we can submit to the Legislative Assembly on May 8th. As every year, we will certify a budget complying with the fiscal plan on time by June 30th. On the broader transformation of the budget process, the government has also made progress. The transformation will improve the way Puerto Rico's budget is developed, consistent with the practices the U.S. states are using and that are considered best practices by government budget experts. Implementing permanent institutional reforms is crucial to prevent Puerto Rico from relapsing into the budgeting practices that precipitated the 2016 debt crisis, which ultimately led to the enactment of PROMESA. To implement these practices, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, needs to be properly resourced. OMB and the Oversight Board mapped out new positions that would strengthen this crucial government agency and ensure future budgets are developed and implemented on solid principles with solid practices with the appropriate skill level and number of people. Together, we promoted these fiscal planning positions, and the response is encouraging. The number of applicants for the open positions clearly signal that employees are taking a second look at these government jobs, contrary to what we often hear about government jobs. A significant number of applicants came from outside Puerto Rico. We hope these opportunities entice some Puerto Ricans with budget and finance experience who live elsewhere to return and help us build a stronger and more prosperous Puerto Rico. OMB received applications from as far as Europe, and Puerto Rico can benefit from this diverse interest. I would like to thank OMB Director Orlando Rivera Berrios for taking the initiative on this critical step to strengthening Puerto Rico's budget process. And I also want to thank Shelby Kearns, the Executive Director of the National Association of State Budget Officers, or NASBO, for helping OMB to promote these positions throughout the U.S. Board members, budget reform is moving forward. The Oversight Board and the government are strengthening OMB. We are working on implementing modified accrual accounting standards as PROMESA mandates and to apply to this fiscal year 2027 budget. We are segregating infrastructure spending in a capital fund, and we are funding reserves to take advantage of our stability and prepare for a more uncertain economic fiscal future. This is real progress, and I want to thank Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon here today for her continuous support of these important reforms. In April, the Oversight Board will invite budget experts from around the country to discuss in a public symposium how U.S. states approach budgeting, how they have handled big changes to improve budget processes, and what they consider best practices. Puerto Rico went through a painful fiscal crisis that deeply affected everyone who lives here. But Puerto Rico is not alone in rethinking and strengthening the process of how the government projects tax revenue, allocates money to government priorities, plans for the future, and overall manages its budget. We hope to see all of you there, and stay tuned for the details of this symposium. Another important step forward by the Puerto Rico government since our last public board meeting is the regulation to strengthen the process of how government contracts for professional services are procured. I would like to thank Carla Mercado Rivera, who heads Puerto Rico's General Services Administration, for leading this progress and for working so successfully with the Oversight Board on a regulation that helped ensure the efficient and responsible use of public funds by promoting full and open competition in certain government contracts. This regulation does not address all systemic weaknesses in the government contract procurement process. Unfortunately, many potential solutions fall outside of the GSA's authority under its Enabling Act and would require legislative action. But the Oversight Board will continue to work with the government on comprehensive procurement reforms, including the establishment of clear standards for competitive bidding, stronger monitoring of exempt entities, greater public transparency in contract awards, and stricter rules for the procurement of professional services. And on PREPA, the Oversight Board asked the government's proceedings to challenge the operating and maintenance contract with Luma Energy to be moved to the U.S. District Court. This is not a reflection of our assessment of Luma's performance, but the Oversight Board's firm position that all matters affecting PREPA's bankruptcy-like proceedings under Title III of PROMESA must be heard in the court that has jurisdiction over PROMESA. The legacy PREPA failed the people of Puerto Rico for too long, leaving Puerto Rico's electrical system in such a deteriorated state that it is difficult for anyone to restore to acceptable levels of performance quickly, as the people expect, regardless of what we conclude regarding Luma's performance. The grid must be managed by a private operator. That is the law in Puerto Rico, and it is a critical element of any chance of improving the energy system mapped out in the fiscal plan. And we look forward to working with the governor and the government on a plan to move forward, and that remains our primary concern. The Title III case itself is moving along the court's schedule, currently mainly focused on the bondholder's administrative expense claim, and we fully understand and share the desire for this bankruptcy to be resolved. But at the same time, the bondholders continue to demand more money than the board believes Puerto Rico can afford to pay. It would put too great a burden on the residents of Puerto Rico, either through higher electricity rates or government tax revenue. We will continue to work on what we believe is a viable solution to close this last chapter of Puerto Rico's massive debt crisis. Thank you, Chair Gonzalez.
Sorry for that. Thank you, Robert. And before I open the floor for questions from board members, I'd like to welcome Governor Jennifer Gonzalez here. We will hear her remarks shortly. Thank you again, Governor. Any board members wish to ask any questions regarding Robert's remarks?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. There being no further comments or questions, I would like to turn the floor over to Governor Jennifer Gonzalez, who would like to make some remarks. Welcome again, Governor.
Thank you, Judge and Mr. Chairman and members of the board for the opportunity today. I'm pleased to be here today, and I just want to note that today marks exactly 1 year since my first remark as governor in this board last year. A year ago, I made a series of commitments, and I talk about pursuing a results-oriented relationship with the Oversight Board. I talked at that time about holding Luma and Genera accountable. At that time, I always said that we were going to deliver balanced budgets and to work tirelessly towards ending the board's supervisions on Puerto Rico's finances. And in order to get that, the government of Puerto Rico must comply with many issues regarding this fiscal responsibility. And today, a year after, I'm proud to report that my administration has delivered on any of those commitments, and we're getting just started. For example, I want to talk about a year of results in fiscal strength, economic momentum, and private sector confidence, which are important to describe how the economy of the island is moving right now. Puerto Rico fiscal position today is stronger than it's been in decades. The Department of Treasury has maintained a solid cash balance that currently exceeds the $11.3 billion, including reserves and liquidity, both day-to-day government operations and emergency contingencies. This level of government liquidity compares favorably to many states, and it represents a tangible reflection of our administration commitment to discipline fiscal management. Moreover, government revenues have grown at an average annual rate of 5% since fiscal year 2017, which is a sustained trend that reflects both a stronger economy and a firm commitment to tax compliance and fiscal transparency. I gave clear instructions to all government agencies, and in particular to the fiscal group, to adopt concrete measures to generate savings and ensure the responsibility use of public resources. And this credibility was also earned through direct and personal engagement with the credit agencies, rating agencies. As you know, in December of last year, I returned to New York to present them with concrete results about what we did during the last year. And the advances in energy generation, the approval of the first balanced budget developed jointly and certified by the Oversight Board, and the progress in reshoring manufacturing investment and job creation on the island. On the economic front, the results are equally compelling. Puerto Rico attracted just last year $2.2 billion in new investment with 17 expansions of manufacturing on the island and over 4,000 committed manufacturing jobs in 2025 alone. The economic activity index reached its highest levels of the year in October and November. Private sector employment reached 767,400 jobs just in November of 2025, which is the highest figure ever recorded on the island. Those are important marks. The total labor force reached approximately 1.2 million people, with total employment exceeding 1.16 million, and unemployment at a historically low rate of approximately 5.8%. 6.7%. Construction and mining, which is one of the areas that I focused during my first year. Construction and mining employment reached 39,900 jobs, the highest since 2009, driven by accelerating public and private project executions across the island and approximately a permitting reform that would allow us to drive faster the economic recovery of the island. But perhaps the most compelling testimony to Puerto Rico's progress does not come from the government. It comes from the private sector itself. On February of this year, we hosted with a FAF in Focus Investment Summit at the Convention Center, bringing together leaders of Puerto Rico's banking, federal, and local sectors of the government to assess Puerto Rico fiscal and economic standing. The summit featured a banking panel that brought together the presidents and CEOs of Banco Popular, First Bank, Oriental Bank, Nave Bank, and Banesco USA Puerto Rico, as well as the general manager of Citibank on the island. Their message was unambiguous. Puerto Rico financial system has experienced one of its strongest moments in decades. They describe robust levels of capitalization and liquidity, low delinquency rates, and growing profitability across the entire banking sector. And remember, this is just happening when a few years ago we lost several banks on the island. So these banking leaders were unequivocal, saying that the sector is ready and willing to expand credit access and drive a new cycle of investment and prosperity on the island. I want to just, as the executive director highlighted in his presentation, since August of last year, the head of OMB, local OMB, Orlando Rivera, and his team has been collaborating with representatives of the Oversight Board on a collaborative fiscal year 2027 government's budget development process. And I want to speak to that of what that's represent from my administration perspective, because it's historically significant. For the first time since the creation of the Oversight Board in 2017, Puerto Rico's government is not merely responding to the board's directives on the budget, we're leading the process. The collaborative process has resulted in numerous joint working sessions, totaling hundreds of hours of that collaborative work, producing more deliberately covering budget targets, risk and liability analysis, special revenue fund projections, and policy frameworks. This co-leadership model, where the government's drive budget development and the Oversight Board plays a supporting capacity building role, is precisely the transition that PROMESA was designed to achieve, the transfer of knowledge from the board to the personnel of the island. So at the end, the people of Puerto Rico and the government of Puerto Rico can carry out all those processes. Our teams remain in close and consistent communication with daily coordination meetings at the staff level. In addition, in La Fortaleza, my chief of staff and executive director of AFAF holds weekly meetings with the board, executive director, and senior staff to address the full spectrum of fiscal matters. But the 2027 budget is being developed under a 5-year multi-annual framework with rigorous scenario-based risk analysis, real-time execution monitoring through a data intelligence system, a budget letter process that's aligned agency submission with certified fiscal plan parameters. And for me, that's important. I want to maintain that discipline. We're also advancing the adoption of a modified accrual accounting, one of the key milestones required for the Oversight Board termination under Section 209 of PROMESA. Let me be direct about our objective. My administration goals is to advance fiscal responsibility and to strengthen budgetary discipline. We achieved the first certified balanced budget for the last fiscal year, and we are now building the second one. Every working session, every deliverably, every disciplined budget decision is a step forward to that goal. In other area, which is energy, the people of Puerto Rico deserve reliable, affordable, electric system. And you know all that when I arrived in office, that was my main priority still is. My administration came to office with a clear mandate to transform the energy sector, to hold contractors accountable and deliver results. We have been executing on that mandate from day one. When I took office last year, many were predicting a summer of massive blackouts. Even in reports, Luma said that Puerto Rico was going to experience a massive blackouts during the year. The system has barely over 2,000 megawatts of generation, far short the projected summer peak, and we worked day and night to change that picture and added 1,200 megawatts of generation that were not available at the start of the year, and the massive blackouts that so many predicted simply did not happen. We contracted 800 megawatts of temporary generation, launched a competitive process to add 3,000 megawatts of permanent generation, and signed an agreement with Tesla for 430 megawatt battery energy storage system. We also secured the U.S. Department of Energy declaration of energy emergency on the island, which accelerated critical administrative and reconstruction processes and secured the relocation of $365 million from the Puerto Rico Resiliency Fund. Those items are very important if we want to maintain and secure the stability of energy on the island, to bring businesses to maintain their operations. The other one is lowering the cost of energy on the island. And to that end, we renegotiated the contract with natural gas supply, representing savings compared to the prior proposals. We restructured that purchase prices to generate an estimated annual savings of $54 million and eliminated the exclusivity clause that had blocked supplier diversification. And again, this is a legacy contract that was there when I arrived in office. But the most significant action we have taken on energy is the legal effort to now underway to remove Luma. And after exhausting every avenue for voluntary remediation, including extensive meetings between our energy sharks, the government chief of staff, Luma's executive, and its parent companies at ATCO and Quanta, and myself, we filed multiple legal actions to cancel and nullify Luma's contract once and for all. At the same time, we are conducting the work necessary to identify and select a private operator that genuinely has experience and the commitment to provide the stable, resilient, and affordable grid that our people and our businesses deserve. I don't want this to go back to PREPA. I want this to be part of a private contractor with experience in the United States to do the job on the island. So in this, we disagree with the position of the board, clearly. But PREPA's debt restructuring has now been ongoing for 8 years, consuming hundreds of millions of dollars in legal and consulting fees, and leaving unresolved the last major obstacle to complete Puerto Rico's full exit from PROMESA Title III proceedings. And this cannot continue indefinitely. And that's the reason I'm committed to do everything within our power to advance a resolution. A just resolution must reflect that reality. A few weeks ago, I established in another sector a dedicated interagency task force specifically focused on assessing and mitigating the potential impact of any reduction in federal Medicaid funding and other federal transfer to Puerto Rico. This Medicaid situation, while I was in Congress, we managed to get a deal for those 5 years with the highest amount of federal funds ever sent to the island, going for 76% of FMAP instead of the statutory 55%. I just yesterday met with the CMS director discussing this issue at length. And the task force that we created with the private sector and public officials, led by PRAFA's executive director, brings representatives from the health insurance companies, as well as the healthcare service providers, professional associations, Secretary of Health, Treasury, Family Department, along with ASES, AFAF, and OMB. and is developing scenarios-based contingency plans, identifying programmatic efficiencies, and strengthening Puerto Rico's advocacy position before Congress and the administration. I need to say that our administration has built a strong, direct, and productive relationship with the Trump administration. And the relationships that we've developed during my years at Congress have allowed us to present Puerto Rico's needs with clarity and urgency at the highest level of federal government. And we will continue to work hand by hand with our allies in the federal government to ensure that our island is treated fairly, and that the federal partnership or recovery depends upon is preserved and strengthened. I just finalize and want to say that I'm proud of the concrete progress we have made toward the goal in the past 12 months. Revenues continue to grow. Our first certified balance budget is behind us, and private sector employment has reached its highest level in Puerto Rico's history. Our banking leaders unanimously declared that Puerto Rico financial system is at its strongest in decades, and the collaborative fiscal year 2027 budget process is building the institutional foundation for lasting fiscal independence. That Puerto Rico fiscal future belongs to our people, and I look forward to our continued collaboration with the Oversight Board, with its members, with the Executive Director and staff to pursue these shared objectives. And I want to say thank you for the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you, Governor, for your comprehensive remarks. Would Robert or any board member like to comment or on the governor's remarks?
Thank you.
No, just Governor, that we appreciate working with you and your administration. There's a lot on the table here, and I've enjoyed talking with you, and we look forward to working with you on the budget reform, the symposium, all the things that we've got on the plate. And we recognize that you and your administration have been working really hard.
Thank you. I want to say thank you personally for bringing your expertise in how OMB offices across the states do their budgets. I believe all those suggestions may help us establish a firm process for the future.
Yeah, we appreciate your willingness to help lead out on this, because that's how we're going to be successful for sure.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you, Governor. No further comments or questions being heard. I'd like to turn the floor over to Elisa Guardiola, our Budget Management Director, for an overview of the Commonwealth's financial condition and budget development. Elisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, board members, Director Mojica, Governor Gonzalez Colon, and everyone listening in. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Elisa Guardiola, Budget Management Director. This morning, I will provide an overview of the Commonwealth fiscal outlook and share the work underway between the government and the Oversight Board as we continue developing the fiscal year 27 budget. We will begin with a look at Puerto Rico's historical and current fiscal condition and the progress made throughout years of sustained fiscal discipline. That discipline has allowed government spending to remain steady while still supporting targeted investments in key areas. We will also review the economic headwinds and declining revenue expectations that shape this year's budget development process. From there, I will provide an overview of the fiscal year 27 Commonwealth budget, including responsible investments in the Budget Stabilization Fund and the Capital Fund, and how these tools strengthen our ability to plan for long-term needs. Finally, we will discuss how this budget reflects a co-lead process between the government and the Oversight Board, a process that continues to implement important budget reforms and advance Puerto Rico's transition to strategic institutional budgeting. With that context, let's move into the executive summary. Puerto Rico has made historic progress in restoring fiscal discipline. For the first time in decades, budgets have remained balanced under PROMESA, supported by more transparent and responsible budgeting practices. At the same time, revenue trends have softened. That means we must continue planning carefully and avoid returning to unsustainable budgeting approaches. The Oversight Board and the government are together transitioning from crisis budgeting to a more institutional and strategic budgeting model, anchored in long-term planning, clear fiscal controls, and transparent priorities. Strengthening cash management and building reserves will be essential to ensuring stability over time. With that context, let's look at where Puerto Rico started before the reforms of recent years. Before PROMESA, Puerto Rico experienced 16 consecutive years in which spending exceeded recurrent revenues. Pension obligations were not fully funded, and public debt had reached unsustainable levels. PROMESA established the Oversight Board to restore fiscal balance and transparency. Since then, the Oversight Board and the government have strengthened controls, improved reporting, and implemented more disciplined financial practices. These changes have helped stabilize the Commonwealth finances and move Puerto Rico away from the structural deficits of the past. This foundation is important, especially as we now face flattening revenues. General fund revenues through November 2025 are lower than the previous 2 years and among the lowest since 2022. This is not a sign of crisis, but it is a clear signal that the fiscal year 27 budget must be built on realistic and conservative assumptions. The weakening trends also reflect broader economic conditions as federal stimulus wind down. Economists have noted slower momentum, and this reinforces the need for cautious planning and responsible budgeting. Understanding the historical, current, and future fiscal conditions of the Commonwealth helps policymakers identify the major drivers of the fiscal challenges Puerto Rico faces moving forward. Before PROMESA, the Commonwealth was on an unsustainable path. The government's budget did not fully account for all obligations. This included understating expenditures related to debt payments, pension-related costs, and several other expenses that were not reflected transparently in the budget. Today, these obligations are fully incorporated into the general fund certified budget. This provides a clearer and more accurate picture of Puerto Rico's true fiscal position. Through sustained fiscal discipline, the Oversight Board has held government spending steady, allowing the government to invest responsibly in critical areas such as health, education, and essential government operations. Since fiscal year 2017, Puerto Rico's general fund operating budget has grown by just over 1% per year on average, far below typical U.S. state budget growth. This restraint reflects the combined effort of the government and the Oversight Board to maintain spending discipline, strengthen controls, and ensure transparency. This discipline foundation is essential as we plan for future fiscal challenges and continue transitioning from crisis-driven budgeting to strategic institutional budgeting. As we turn to fiscal year 27, the discipline continues to guide our work. The fiscal year 27 budget targets remain largely flat compared to fiscal year 26, reflecting downward revenue trends. This reflects the current revenue outlook and the need to remain conservative. The targets remove one-time items from fiscal year 26, continue essential commitments under the plan of adjustment, and maintain temporary measures only where needed to manage operating risks responsibly. This protects the Commonwealth from overextending during a period of economic uncertainty. The Treasury single account often appears to hold significant cash. However, much of this balance is restricted. tied to statutory appropriations, prior year commitments, or obligations under the plan of adjustment. The true amount available for general operations is far smaller than the headline figure. This is why strengthening the Budget Stabilization Fund and the Capital Fund is important. These reserves enhance transparency, clarified what funds are actually available, and help ensure the Commonwealth is prepared for shifting economic conditions, natural disasters, and long-term infrastructure needs. The Oversight Board and the government are closely monitoring several fiscal risks as we plan for the fiscal year 27 and beyond. Revenue risks include variability in tax collections and higher than expected earned income tax credit claims. Operational risks involve pressures on key agencies and statutory obligations that may require additional funding. Federal funding risks, especially related to Medicaid, remain significant given Puerto Rico's reliance on federal support. Energy-related risks tied to PREPA and workforce-related liabilities also require careful attention. Recognizing these risks is essential to maintaining credible, resilient financial planning. Every U.S. state and territory maintains reserves to manage downturns, disasters, and unexpected fiscal shocks. Puerto Rico must do the same. Reserves are a core component of responsible budgeting. They demonstrate preparedness, build confidence among rating agencies and investors, and protect essential services during economic uncertainty. The work to rebuild these reserves is a necessary part of strengthening Puerto Rico's fiscal future. Institutionalizing the Budget Stabilization Fund and the Capital Fund is central to improving long-term planning. The Stabilization Fund creates a buffer during downturns and enhances transparency around available operating cash. The Capital Fund provides a dedicated source for infrastructure investment and separates long-term capital needs from the day-to-day operating budget, a best practice widely used across the U.S. states. Together, these funds strengthen Puerto Rico resilience and align our budgeting practices with national standards and expectations. 4 major reforms support this year's budget process. Budget reform legislation to modernize Puerto Rico budgeting framework and codify improved timelines and structures. Centralized financial planning supported by the ERP system and strengthen OMB capabilities to provide better data and more coordinated financial oversight. Establishment of reserves fund supported by operationalization of Budget Stabilization Reserve and Capital Fund, and modified accrual accounting, which will begin implementation with the fiscal year 27 general fund budget, a required step under PROMESA and essential for long-term fiscal stability. These reforms are critical to Puerto Rico's transition from crisis to strategic budgeting. We are currently in the detailed phase for the fiscal year 27 budget, and we're quickly moving to the governor's submission review and legislative engagement. The government will formally present the proposed budget to the Oversight Board in early March. From there, the Oversight Board will continue its review, engage with the legislature, and work towards certification by June 30th, consistent with PROMESA requirements. Throughout this process, the government and the Oversight Board remain aligned on the importance of responsible, strategic, and transparent budgeting. Puerto Rico has made meaningful progress driven by collaborative work of the government and the Oversight Board to restore fiscal stability and prepare for a more resilient future. Sustaining this progress demands continued discipline, clear planning, and long-term thinking. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continue working together. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Elisa. Would any board member or Robert wish to ask any questions?
No, but thank you very much. The presentation is very helpful.
Excellent presentation, great work.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Elisa. There being no further comments or questions, we now have concluded the substance of today's meeting. I would like to thank Robert, our staff, Governor Gonzalez and her administration, and all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be handling any comments and questions through the Oversight Board's website. Does any board member have any other matters to discuss today?
I don't, Judge.
All right,
No, thanks.
thank you. Since we have no other matters to cover, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Any second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All of the board members present having voted in favor, the meeting is now adjourned. I invite you to join us for the press conference to follow. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Judge.
Governor.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todos. We're going to start our press conference. Bienvenidos a los medios de la prensa. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or write in the chat box or just let me know. Podemos comenzar. ¿Alguna pregunta?
We can start. Do we have any questions?
From Optus.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to, I have two questions, actually. One is if you could give some color on the talks with the Commonwealth regarding the relief checks. And, is it a question of the size of the checks or the amount of relief? And also, during your last meeting and previous to that, the board had made a big issue about finding an external financing mechanism for the PREPA settlement, and I'm wondering if anything is, if you could provide any update regarding talks with the Commonwealth on that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so on the check itself, it really is, the presentation today is part of informing that conversation. It's not about whether or not tax relief is deserved or people need to get some relief. It really is about how does that impact the amount of reserves that we have going forward? How does it impact what funds are available to fund prior year commitments? And that was part of the presentation today. So we'll look at it in terms of, do we have a rainy day fund? Is it funded? What should it be funded at? Which is a budget stabilization fund. Puerto Rico has one, but it hadn't been funded since 2008. We don't have a capital projects fund. We should. We set aside an emergency reserve fund for disasters. And so by doing the check, does it compromise the ability to do those things? That's the question that we are having. The government has taken a position that they recognize we need to control spending. And unlike in previous years when we did a credit, we actually did it because there was overperformance in the revenues. So revenues actually came in higher than we had projected in an environment where revenues were growing. So that overperformance was then refunded. This is a different scenario. So we also work with the government on identifying what spending commitments would you not do in order to fund this. And we're at the last stages, I think, of that conversation. And I think we also want to make sure that there's a commitment from the government to also fund the capital reserve, the budget stabilization reserve, in addition to funding it. And as I said in my remarks, I think you can do all three, but we shouldn't do one without doing the other. So that's where we are with the tax credit discussion. I think we should have a resolution to that, hopefully by the end of this week. With regard to the PREPA POA, it's actually the same conversation. So they are linked, because if you have the funds to do a credit, to do a tax credit and do a refund, it comes from the same general fund revenues. And we're going to have a symposium on budget reform coming in April. You need a budget stabilization fund, a rainy day fund like every state in the union has. And what the sizes of those are. And then the question is, right, what resources do you have after you do those things that are available for anything else, which would include the POA, to the extent only that there's no room to raise rates, right? The Commonwealth is only a source for the plan of adjustment because the board had concluded, based on the information from prior fiscal plans, that there wasn't capacity within the rate structure to raise rates and also fund the system. Therefore, in order to fund the POA that was filed, you went to the Commonwealth. But it's only a fund of last resort because you don't have the capacity. So these are the same these are the same combinations, these are choices. And the first priority for the board is to make sure that the Commonwealth is strategically positioned to deal with economic downturns, funding all the commitments that it has been made, and then, right, what resources are available, both to fund the tax credit, right, and anything else.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, John. Next question is Alex from Cyber News. Then we have Vocero. Go ahead, Alex.
Sí, recapitulando.
Yeah, summarizing what John asked. So the situation about the stimulus, you're saying that the conversations are not so much about the amount of it, but how the government can save in order to establish that amount? That's the first question. The second one about PREPA. Do you then favor, as PREPA proposed, to keep the provisional rate to be able to pay for pensions? And they have a proposal that had already been rejected, but I would like to know if it still stands, for the general fund to be the one absorbing the payment of those pensions.
All of these conversations are connected to one another, right? There's only a finite amount of revenues that the Commonwealth has. So in your first question, it was, well, how are you going to fund the tax credit? Right. Through the same dollars that you talk about later of how you're going to fund the pensions potentially. So the first conversation with regard to the tax credit is, how are we going to pay for that? And then the size of it is dependent on that. If there's enough resources to pay for it without compromising the Commonwealth's ability to fund all of its other commitments, capital project commitments, make sure it has sufficient reserves going forward like all other states have, and then do you have any available resources to do that? That has been the conversation. It is all within the context of, is it responsible when you look at all these other things? Because taken by itself, you could say, well, yes, this is a good thing to do. This is why the board has always taken the position that these kinds of decisions should happen as part of the budget process. Because when you're doing the budget, you're looking at all the revenues, you're looking at all the spending priorities, and you're making the decisions within that context. So that's why we're reviewing it. We're reviewing all of those things. The size of it, how you're going to pay for it, how does it impact other things that we think are priorities. Funding capital funds, funding reserves that every state has, and also funding the emergency reserve. When it comes to the issue of PREPA pensions, same issue. If you saw on the table that we went through, revenues are actually declining year over year. So the choice actually is, you fund them through the rates, which is where they presently are, because they are obligations of PREPA. And as an obligation of PREPA, they need to get paid. There are only three things that could happen. Either you don't fund the pensions, which I know the board has said it's a priority to fund. You fund them through the rate, or you find another source to fund them. Those are the options. Right now, they're on the rate. If you take them off the rate, you either go back to not funding them, or what's the other source? Revenues are not increasing, right? They're declining year over year. The budget is flat. So in order for the Commonwealth to fund them, you would need a recurring revenue stream of $300 million a year, and that would compete against things like tax reductions, other spending priorities, funding the reserves that we need for something that is not an obligation of the Commonwealth. It's purely a PREPA obligation. So right now, that's where it is. I've seen no other proposal that functions on how to fund this. The appropriate place for it to be is as an obligation of PREPA, but if you wanted to do it some other way, you'd have to show a recurring funding source of $300 million a year, and that would continue because the total obligation is $4 billion.
¿Alguna otra pregunta, Alex?
Any other question, Alex? One more, if I'm allowed. You said that you agree with the fact that there needs to be changes to the tax system. I would like to know if you have any date, any timeline where you understand that those conversations and implementation processes would be concluded. I don't know, 2027, 2028. Before that, maybe?
The budget reform conversation should be happening now. Doesn't need to be delayed to any further time. What we had said was we have to now move from, we were crisis budgeting, dealing with the aftermath of the debt crisis. Now we're at a point where we can plan strategically. Tax reform is part of that. So now is the time to have those conversations. And in fact, these conversations were ongoing and are ongoing with the government, right? There was a shift to do something immediate because there was a desire for immediate tax relief, and that is the conversation around the tax credit. But the tax credit doesn't resolve the deficiencies that exist within the tax system in Puerto Rico that make it not competitive and make it a barrier for growth. Some of those decisions to reform a system are complicated and hard and require tough choices. But we need to have that conversation. And we're having that conversation with the government, but it is something that we are not delaying for a future time. It needs to have now, but we need an actual result that is more than changing just rates. It is something that we would need to go in and say, if you want to broaden the base, there are some tough choices that have been made, and there are implications to doing that. But at the same time, there are implications for leaving the tax structure exactly as it is, right? With amongst the highest corporate tax rates in the country, among the highest income tax rates, where the high rate kicks in at a very low threshold. So these conversations need to happen now. It's not about delay. It's really about how do you reach agreement to get to a comprehensive tax reform, because you're probably not going to have multiple opportunities to do this.
Okay, gracias, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Cero, go ahead, Pedro. You can ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Bueno.
Good morning, everybody. Is there an established date for the government to hand in the certifications regarding that stimulus check, and pending that? Well,
they would then send us a 204 letter, 204 section on the promesa, and then we would evaluate it. That process is different this time because what we've said is, instead of you sending us something and us reacting to it with letters, let's sit in a room and try to work this out so that when the 204 letter actually comes, it's something that we have an agreement on already. So that is what's happened. And that is why last week we said we're going to extend the deadline on our own for you, because we want to make sure that we can reach an agreement, we can talk to the board members and get their position, and then come up with a conclusion to this process whereby we can make a final determination. So it's not really about they haven't given us something and we're waiting for them. Staffs have been meeting regularly. They've been talking. They've been going back and forth. And again, our perspective sometimes might be different in that we are looking at a much broader perspective. How does this impact the reserves? How does this impact long-term? How does this impact the budget that we're planning for that we haven't even seen yet for 2027, right? We're applying that lens to this as well. But I think nonetheless, I think we're getting there. We're getting closer, and I hope we can reach a conclusion by the end of the week.
Thank you, Robert. I see Luis Valentin hand. Go ahead, Luis. CPI.
Hi. I
do have a few questions on the topic of the budget reform that was discussed during the meeting. Guardiola mentioned a few things that would be done, or at least I understood that would be done for the next budget, including budget reform legislation. She mentioned the ERP and she mentioned modify accrual rules. My question will be on those. When she talked about budget reform legislation, are those bills filed already, or does that have to be done now at the same time as the budget is approved on the legislative process? I also want to know the status of the ERP implementation and whether the government and the board already agreed on the modified accrual rules to move forward for the next budget. Those are my first questions.
Sure. On the budget reform legislation, this is comprehensive. We're working on it internally. We want to have the symposium that kind of discusses what the best practices are. We also want to work with the government on this. The government has expressed a strong interest in the budget reform. And myself as a former budget director, and also we have John Nixon on the board as a former budget director, and we have members on the board who care about this deeply, and it's inherent in what Promesa is, because this would be the institutional changes that survive post-board, which is why this is important, because the board is here, right, and we can segregate funds, hold things aside, but when the board is gone, what survives in terms of how did the process change so that the things that brought you the debt crisis in 2016 are not repeated. Because if you don't change anything, or anyone that goes through bankruptcy, anyone goes through a crisis, it's what are the lessons learned and how do you change as going forward? And you can have governors who are fiscally conservative and want to hold the line, but those things change. What survives is the institutional changes. So we're going to work with the governor's office on that before, right? We advance any legislation. We're working on it internally, work with them. We want to have the symposium and then have a dialogue with the legislature as well on how to do this. These are not things that the board is making up, though. These items are things that are the standard practices in budget offices throughout the country. And many offices that have been doing this, far longer, right, than Puerto Rico. I come from a budget office in New York that has a budget office that has a 100-year history. Was established in the 1920s, the budget office alone, right? So there are a lot of lessons learned. There are lessons learned from Detroit, there's lessons learned from Washington, D.C., and there are just lessons learned from well-managed states. All of those things would be in this, and it's just standard things that I think there is universality around how you manage a budget going forward.
Hey, Robert, can I just add a few things on that? Just real quick. Sorry, I'm in the car. I'm late for a flight, but yeah, this is probably, I would argue, and now I'm a little bit biased, but this is probably some of the most important work we'll do as a board. Not to diminish the bankruptcies and everything else and all the great work the board's done, but we want to make sure that these deals that we're making, put the Commonwealth in a position to where they'll be able to live up to them, make sure that creditors get paid, make sure that the government's working with, living within its means. And again, as Robert said, this is not rocket science. I did it in both Michigan and Utah. We've got a lot of budget directors involved here, but this needs to be institutionalized and the behavior needs to change, because absent these financial best practices, once the board's gone, we don't want to revert back into bankruptcy or back into the bad financial practices of the past. So I really appreciate, we've talked to the governor, we're working closely with the governor implementing these. It's going to take her leadership within the government to make that happen, working with the legislature as well. But this is something that the public and the Puerto Rican people should expect and should demand from its government, because absent these financial best practices and Commonwealth operating in a rational way, it's always going to be in financial trouble into perpetuity.
Judge, I want to just, sorry, go ahead, Arthur.
No, I was just gonna add maybe to it, how, how we work with the Commonwealth and develop these budget, ideas, skills, tool set, etc., is really ultimately the legacy of the board and the legacy of Promesa. Because when all is said and done, Promesa is designed to address various problems, including the insolvency issues with in terms of the bankruptcies, etc. But more importantly, it is to develop systems that when the board is gone, the market, the people, everyone can rely on those systems reflecting the true fiscal uh, position of Puerto Rico and move forward in a responsible way. So we really have to do this, and we should do this. It's good government. It's not one side or the other of the aisle. It's about being responsible to the people of Puerto Rico in terms of addressing their needs, being able to address their needs, and not go through a process, well, we need to do X, we'll do it, and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. That is not a responsible way to do things. And we hope that we move in that direction, resolve the issues, and get on a path that all will look at and say, well, this path has been created, and this path will be followed by the various governments and, the leaders of government in Puerto Rico, and move forward, and the board can, then its job is finished. But we've done a lot of work, we continue to do work, but there's still more to do. And I have a great deal of confidence in the cooperation between the government and the board, specifically Robert and his staff, to achieve these goals.
Thank you. I just want to underscore what Chair Gonzalez and Board Member Nixon just said with regard to the access to the credit markets and the tie to budget reform to rebuilding confidence in the process in Puerto Rico, right? There was a collapse and a complete loss of confidence in the financial management as a result of the debt crisis. And the lessons learned from that was there weren't guardrails in place. There wasn't transparency, and that resulted in the bankruptcy, amongst other things. This is something that the government can control. So you have economics, you have the economy that might change, where you have other factors that are outside the control of government. But the process by which you manage the budget is entirely under the control of the government. And so that is something that we actually can do. And that is something that the rating agencies are going to be looking at, because many of them got burned first time around, and they're looking for how are we going to exit this process with new guardrails, new safeguards, new transparency to show that the budgets will be managed in a better place going forward, because the processes and the institutions have changed, so you don't get a repeat.
I'm sorry, I guess, and I appreciate all the input, but just to make sure, like, it will require eventual legislation. It's just that you're not there yet. You're in discussions with the government and working with the symposium and all that. I'm missing the status on the ERP, and if you could be good on that, just a quick update on the status. Is that implemented or not, and how far is it from being implemented? And also if there's agreement on the modified accrual rules with the government.
On the ERP, realistically, those questions should be directed towards the government, because the government is actually managing the ERP process. They've made changes to the process. They're managing it. So it is not implemented yet. I've heard deadlines relating to implementation around the summer, but the management of that project is entirely under the control of the government. So more appropriately directed to them. With regard to the modified accrual rules, we've worked internally to modify them and make them more consistent with a government, because the reality is, right, governments are different, and there are some exceptions with regard to things that you spend in 1 year, the one-time expenses. These budgets that are being submitted to us, we think this year the budget can be submitted to us under a modified accrual standard, which is under PROMESA. We're working with the government to do that, and we anticipate this year, right, the budget to be submitted to us consistent with modified accrual. And in other offices that use modified accrual, right, they take the budget that they use and then they just convert it, right, to modified accrual, make sure it's consistent with those standards, and that's what we're working with the government on. And as far as the legislation is concerned, we're working on it internally, but before we go out with it, we want to make sure that we've made sure that everyone has had a hand, right, in it. Because again, this is important that the legislature passes it, the government is supportive of it, so it's going to require all of us together. But the timing of it is this year.
Perfect. And just my last question is on another topic is regarding power expectations, the contract that is under review by the board. I just want a quick update on that, whether the information requested by the board was already submitted. I know that there's a few days still for the deadline, but I just want to make sure how's that process going on, and whether the Gotham Energy contract was already submitted, or if you guys haven't received that yet.
I don't know if we formally have received the Gotham contract yet. I have to check. With regard to power expectations, we received some information. It was not complete. We're waiting for additional information to come in as part of our review.
Gracias, Robert. Any other question? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Okay, I think not. So if no further question, we conclude our press conference. Thank you, everyone. Gracias a todos.
Thank you.
Yeah.